now. Let's
What's
just
the
assume
most?
that we're starting now. What were you going to say?
All right, nothing. All right, I guess we're live on YouTube, right?
I think. Hey, YouTube. I think.
Hey.
So we have been going about this. Mike and myself have been going about this, trying to get this YouTube live video initiated for over an hour now, and I think we've finally done it in such a way that we've been looking to do. So Mike is here live with me, and we wanted to talk about something tonight. It's a really great topic. It's based on something that I started in a video that Mike followed up with on and actually kind of rebutted in a good way. Actually, I think that that's what the whole purpose of this kind of discourse is about. And he also raised some broader points that I want to highlight tonight by speaking. So, Mike, thanks for joining me.
Hey, yeah. So I'll jump in just to give some background context. We're two-thirds of the Reason Vegan. I'm Mike Favada. That's Scout Hartley. Evan is not with us, but this video is about pescatarianism, as you can tell from the title. And Scout posted a video a few months back, I guess it was now, about the topic of pescatarianism and his frustration with it. And I understand that frustration very much, but I also worry about it from an advocacy standpoint about whether or not we want to be so hard on our pescatarian friends. So, do you want to just introduce, I guess, your thoughts in that video in brief summary, Scott?
Yeah, I mean, and I should say in the outset, the point of the video wasn't really to put forth a very super serious argument, but it is something that does irk me when people try. The point that I made in the video was that the word pescatarianism in itself as a concept is meaningless and ought not exist. And I made the argument essentially that people use the term pescatarianism, they ascribe that to themselves to try to distinguish themselves from people who eat beef or pigs or any other type of what we would call a land animal. And I basically made the point that this is a distinction without a difference, and therefore we should throw out the term. We should no longer consider it a legitimate term because it doesn't mean anything different. And the point was really simple, but it is something that I see a lot of. It still does really irk me, kind of irrespective of the advocacy, relationship aspects of it. But I think what is really important about your point, your post, I should say, Mike, was that the your way of counter arguing my point wasn't to actually try to contradict me, but to say, hey, look, let's put that aside for now, and let's try to see what we can do to build a coalition for the animals, for the environment, for veganism, um, and considering them perhaps allies. It's a perspective I did not consider when I made the video.
Yeah, I mean, that's always a really hard thing in advocacy. In all advocacy, no one is going to be like, or very few people are going to be 100% lined up with you ideologically perfectly. So, you have to work with people who in certain aspects you find unsavory. And there's all kinds of um, parallels to, like, early women's rights and black rights. Do we pursue women's rights before we try to end slavery, or vice versa? So there's all kinds of like intersectional movements that have had to struggle with this, and it really is a big deal. Do you want like a small number of hardcore vegans that are like straight down the line ideologically um, simpatico with you, or do you want a big tent? And I think we at the Reason Vegan in general have gone towards the idea of having as big a tent as possible and
Yeah.
not alienating people. So I think it makes sense to see pescatarians as people who are maybe more persuadable than the general public, maybe a little bit on our side. Um, and yeah, maybe they have further to go on their journey, we believe. But I think they're a demographic of people that we should be sympathetic to, and we should be happy for what they do. Um, as far as like whether or not it should be a term, that's a tricky one, because I mean, language describes the world not as it should be, not as you think it ought to be, but as it is. So I don't think flat earthers are logical. I don't think it's a logical thing to be a flat earther in today's day and age, but there's still a word for it because there's just enough people in the world that for whom that describes their philosophy, unfortunately, today. Um, and you took issue with that a little bit. Do you agree with that? I mean, you're going to give these people their word, right? You just don't think it's a logical word?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, we don't have a choice. As long as it's a concept that people invoke, a word, it's going to be there to stay. But I guess I'm being a little more glib than I'd like to be with the point. Like we should throw out the term. Um, but essentially, what I mean is that we should disregard it. We should not consider it kind of as a legitimate concept. Um, and what I would have said a few weeks or a few months ago when I made the video was that what we should try to do is kind of dissuade people from using that term and maybe try to make them realize at least what I would believe that this is a distinction without a difference. Um, so I guess I would never have said sure we can actually get rid of it, but I would argue at least a few weeks ago that we can get pretty close if we just try to advocate away from using that term.
I'm interested in that. So with my example of flat earthers, would you say the same thing about them? Would you say that the way to not give that movement oxygen is to try to eliminate the usage of that term? Because my instinct is just to say, hey, that's a bad set of ideas. I'm not going to say that they're perverting language or go after the labeling of them. I'm just thinking that they're people with bad ideas. Wouldn't you? Wouldn't you say the same of pescatarians? I don't see the focus on the word. I see that as kind of strange.
Well, so to get to the first question about like with the flat earth, how that might be an analogy here, I think the difference is that we haven't seen what happens when we try to contradict or try to like dissuade people from using the term pescatarian. But we have seen attempts to try to get people to not talk about flat Earth or to laugh at them when they talk about flat Earth. And frankly, this doesn't do me any justice or my argument from a few months ago any justice, but it hasn't stopped flat Earth from being a concept. Going back to as long as people use it, it's a thing. It doesn't matter what we say or what we try to keep people from saying vocally. These are terms that are going to be used online, and they are going to slip into conversations and in the public discourse. Um, so that again goes to your point that you really can't just get rid of this thing. But my focus on the word itself is because I still believe this, that people really do try to distinguish themselves by calling themselves pescatarian. And maybe it's not to the same extent that I would have argued a few months ago. Maybe I have to reevaluate just how much they are trying to distinguish themselves. But I do believe that the word is a way to try to separate oneself from some of the more obvious problems involved in animal agriculture. Um, I've even heard people kind of use vegetarianism and pescatarianism in the same two sentences with each other to describe themselves. That they are vegetarian, but they eat fish sometimes and things like that. And that just makes them pescatarian, like they guess. But and I just think that as long as it's like this thing, it's kind of like the argument with reducitarianism, where as long as it's a thing that people can kind of latch onto, it might be a crutch for people to stop themselves from going further ethically.
Right, but there's two parallel dangers there. But what words do for you is supply you with an identity and something to, like you said, kind of latch yourself onto. It is a boat on which you can hitch yourself. But the parallel danger is that if you don't have a word for pescatarian, if you're just like some guy who kind of has an aversion to meat, but maybe you just like fish and vegetables. If you don't have an identity, maybe pescatarianism is a bulwark against meat eating. Maybe having that identity is something that allows you to say, hey, I'm going to reject poultry and beef and lamb and land animals, and that is preventing them from backsliding further into the mainstream standard American diet.
Mm-hmm.
So what would you say to that opposite point?
Yeah, I mean, I get it. Like, and this was kind of the point of your post too, was progress is progress. And people who tend to say that they're pescatarian are people who tend to say, yes, I do not eat those other animals. And that is a step closer towards veganism or vegetarianism. Um, you know, I'm just sometimes I can be a little pedantic, and this is one of those times. But to me, it just still doesn't really sound like it means much, even in terms of an identifier. But it also doesn't sound like it's much of a difference either to say that that one eats fish, but one does not eat other types of animals. I think one of the points that I made in the pescatarianism video too was I think a lot of people when they think that they don't want to eat those land animals, we'll call them, it's because of animal cruelty and things like that, and the environment. But you know, there's different lines of argumentation with regards to each um, type of meat that one can consume. And there is an intense line of argumentation with regards to consumption of fish. Whether it's the possibility of fishless oceans or farm fishing, and all the bacterial, issues that happen with that, or even just in terms of the sheer numbers of fish that are killed per year, and the number of fish that are killed through overfishing.
Yeah,
You know,
but we both agree that eating fish is wrong. Um, but the
well, so my
problem,
point is that, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but my point is
yeah,
that while we all agree that it might be wrong, I think that my concern is that if we don't take a, I don't want to say take a stand, but if we don't try to figure out what this means, then I think what would happen is there would be a misimpression that it's more of
you're
a
doing
step than
enough.
it really is.
Yeah,
Yes, and I'm concerned by that, but I'm also, all of this aside, I mean, I actually do agree with you. Your post really did convince me, that regardless of the substantive aspects of whether it's different or whether it's ethically, has fewer ethical implications or something like that, what we really need to be focusing on at the Reason Vegan, and more generally as an advocacy movement, is making sure that we are, and not even just for the purposes of having a big tent, but being able to say to people, hey, look, we're supporting you in your path towards being more ethical. So it's not just a matter of being inclusive, but it's a matter of being there to model what good behavior might be, and like to push people maybe in an like in an indirect way towards veganism, but without saying, we'll just lump you in with everyone else because, even though you don't eat the same types of meat, you still eat some meat. You know what I'm saying? So you've
yeah.
convinced me of that.
I mean, I don't think people are saying um, I don't think that they have the same ethical principles as us, and they're just like, I'm just going to stop here. Like they're just, I guess they're, well, what are their motivations is one question. I think that part of the problem here is that pescatarians are probably motivated by health more than anything, because I think a lot of the health concerns tend to stem from meat, and I don't see a lot of huge press against eating fish for health reasons. I mean, you could worry about mercury if you eat a lot of tuna in particular. Um, but my point may be that we could argue till we're blue in the face about ethics and environmental issues, and maybe pescatarians won't care. That's one issue and one possibility. Um, but we do need to go in there and have that talk about fishless oceans and garbage patches from in the oceans from fishing boats leaving equipment out there. Those are ethical issues, but it's not that silly of a thing to be proud of being pescatarian, because we know a lot of the environmental destruction does happen from carbon emissions from cows and deforestation from beef, all those things. Such a huge problem with water runoff and air pollution. Uh, and it's not the most ridiculous thing from an ethical perspective either. It's not like uniformly sea animals are less cognitively developed than land animals, but I think that cows and chickens are more cognitively developed and probably more able to feel pain than a lot of chickens. So I'm saying to pescatarians, look, I see how this is progress, and I see that this is a good thing that you're doing, but there's all this other stuff here. So I'm not. I wouldn't be as ready as you to say, look, this is a non-sept. We should, get rid of the term.
Thanks for using that term. Hey,
Yeah,
public,
I actually really
Noncept is a
like
Scout
that.
Hartley original. Yeah,
I
that's
googled that and I was like, did he come up with that? But apparently you did. Noncept,
yeah,
a concept
that's a
that
Scout
shouldn't be a
Hartley
concept.
original world. So
Yeah,
don't
that's
start
really
doing
great.
that. This is documentation. Yeah. No, but um yeah, and I think that this is exactly why this is such an important topic because I think the wall that we're up against right now is the same wall that we might be up against with reducitarianism or just kind of um anything well, just if you want to be extreme about it or overly broad, anything that's not veganism as a lifestyle choice, where we have to ask ourselves, and well, tell me actually if I'm misconstruing what your point is, but I feel like what you're saying is we have that we are facing the same dilemma, that what we have to ask ourselves is how much support leads to enabling for people to not go further,
Yes.
and what do we do with individual actions that are not that are better than not doing anything, but not quite as far as what would be best. And that's what makes this such an interesting topic because there's so many different ways we can talk about this very subject. And you actually really opened up the discussion in your post by saying, or by asking the question, should we wrap our arms around these people and call them allies? Because progress is progress, and we do want to be a big tent, and we do want to model good behavior and show that we are not exclusionary. Um, and that's why this is a really important conversation that we need to have because I think what you did in the post is you got this started about defining who are our allies. What do we define as an ally? What would you say to that?
Yeah, and the fact is that we need allies. I will just self-indulgently read a paragraph, just a two-sentence paragraph from that post that gets at what you're saying, from my blog post that's response to your video. How do we balance our idealism that says that veganism is vastly more ethical than other diets versus our pragmatism that says that we are a tiny minority and alienating non-vegans doesn't work? How do we encourage people that take steps towards reducing their dependence on animal products without giving people the kind of watered down message that meatless Mondays can save the world? Um, I do think that anyone who takes steps towards reducing their meat consumption and animal product consumption is an ally to some extent in that they are, at very least, they're more persuadable than the general public. I mean, the worst enemies are people who think nothing of animal consumption, who don't even really understand the arguments for the other side. I've said many times before that um, before I went vegan, before I started thinking about these issues at all, if two dishes on a restaurant menu were equally palatable to me, and one was meat and one was vegan, you could have pretty much flipped a coin. I mean, it really didn't matter to me. There was nothing on the scale on the other side that was saying, hey, maybe eating meat every meal isn't such a good idea. So that sort of apathy is our enemy. And I think people that can poke holes in that and pose problems for that viewpoint are going to be our allies. Now, ally can be an elastic term. We can have people that are 95% vegan, um, and maybe they just a couple times a year they eat fish. That's that does a lot of advocacy work. That's a major ally versus someone who's just like a
And
totally apathetic vegetarian. Um, ally is relative, but it's poking holes in that apathy and total unconcerned. Do you agree with that?
yeah, no, I do, and I think that this is very interesting for me because and actually in another life that I live on a day to day, I do advocacy for child welfare and for foster care reform, and the type of questions that we're asking right now about who are our allies, this question exists in that community, but in a totally different way. So that's why this is a very interesting and important discussion because it really gets to I have not said this in a while, so I'm very happy to say this, but the depth, the breadth, and the nuance of a vegan life and the implications of everything else. Um, it's something that I really didn't give a lot of deep thought to. And if I can go back in time a few months to myself making that video about pescatarianism, I would say do things a little differently with this video. Try to articulate the case a little bit more differently, because I think, and exactly as you summarized in your post when you just the one that you just read, we want to walk a balance because we don't want to make it seem like that meatless Mondays can save the world, or that you know that the job is done at pescatarianism, um, or that the job hasn't been done at all if you're pescatarian. We want to make sure that we're saying yes, good. I'm glad you're doing something. I don't even know how to necessarily articulate it, but because obviously when I'm speaking to the individual I would know what to say, but like in an abstract way, just having this discussion here, I don't exactly know how I would even frame it in the way that you have, which is why I'm very glad that you're here, because um the what makes this really great again is that I was proven wrong, for lack of a better, I'm just going to say it. I made a video, I made some claims, and they were not as thought through as I would like to have hoped. And you demonstrated that on through your post in terms of thinking big. Think, how do we create this movement? Maybe that argument that I made on my video wasn't the best argument in terms of building this movement. And I want to say publicly that this is okay. I'm happy with being shown that I was a little erroneous in my video, because we really want to be vulnerable. This is a really a new movement in the way that we're trying to frame it, and we want to be vulnerable. And I'm okay with being vulnerable about being proven, wrong about this, about
Yeah, I
my
mean,
articulation of the case.
I appreciate that. I am heartened by your humility, and I don't even think it was really about wrongness. I think it was just I think that you're speaking to something real in terms of being idealistic, in terms of
Mhm.
saying, like, we need to grab the bull by the horns and just say that this is wrong because this doesn't really make sense, this distinction between sea flesh and animal flesh. I totally understand that viewpoint. But yeah, there's bigger picture approach things that you have to question. I mean, it's very hard. This sort of pragmatism versus idealism, it comes up a lot in veganism. And um, idealism may be good in many ways, and it educates people too. I mean, maybe some pescatarians watched your video and said, boy, this guy sees animal flesh and sea animal flesh as totally like symmetrical. I never really even thought about it that way. Maybe it has some educational purpose. Another way in this comes up is like vegans will attack each other for buying like some cereal that may have some honey derived ingredient in 0.01% of it or something like that. And there's the asshole idealism side that says like you're a bad vegan, you're not a vegan because you bought some cereal like that. But then there's another education side where it's like, hey, look, consider all the ingredients that are in this. You could take that too far and worry about trace ingredients to a ridiculous degree, or you could be like, hey, thanks, I'm not going to buy that product anymore. I thought it was vegan, but I was educated by an idealist who taught me that it isn't. So
Yeah.
just kind of weighing both sides of that.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, and to zoom out a little bit, I mean, there is no one best way for this kind of thing. And the whole point of the reason vegan is to exemplify that veganism represents a very diverse group of thought and different approaches to how to create a more vegan world for each of us. So there's room for the idealists and there's room for the pragmatists, but in terms of building a coalition, which is what we want to do here at the Reason Vegan, we want to make sure that we're being pragmatists.
Yeah, because
And
we're
I think
small.
that any responsible advocate would say that they want to be pragmatists and recruiters and good ambassadors and everything like that, because um, I'm not winning over, I'm sure that there maybe were a few people who maybe connected some dots when they heard that sea flesh and land meat flesh is the same, but I'm sure I'm not winning hearts and minds with my argument. However, with your type of rhetoric, I think that that's where we win the hearts and the minds. And if we are able to tailor our messaging such that we are putting a hand over their shoulder and moving them forward at the same time, that's exactly where we want to be, and that's exactly what the takeaway from this discussion should be. It certainly is for myself, and I hope even for the
Yeah,
viewers out there too.
yeah. It's tough. Again, I understand. I was talking about reducitarianism with Mike. I think his name is Mike Sturius from was it Catskills Animal Sanctuary that we went to?
Skylands.
Skylands. Yeah. And I was kind of being supportive of reducitarianism. Reducitarianism. I was playing my role in this conversation, and he was playing more the idealist. And he was kind of seeing it as like a soft bigotry of low expectations. Like, I'm vegan, I know what's up. But for you, maybe you just try breakfast once a week. Maybe you just try meatless Mondays. And I see the benefits of incremental change, but at the same time, I'm going back and forth on this and being more idealistic. Maybe you want to be more like Aristotelian virtue ethics. What kind of person do you want to be? Do you want to be the kind of person that does right 50% of the time or 80% of the time? How often do you want to be ethically right? Um, it's sometimes really like putting the ball in people's court and saying like, look, if you're convinced by these arguments, just do the right thing and be vegan. But it's tricky. It's tricky because people are not that easily convinced, and people
Hmm.
are not easy to change.
Yeah, I mean, and I just a few years ago, like 4 years ago, I wasn't vegan. There was a period of time where I knew all of the information, well, not all of the information, but I knew a good amount of information, and I still did not go vegan for a little while. So there are a lot of factors involved in one's decision to go vegan. That's definitely true. But I want to go back to something that you said too about how you go back and forth about this thing between idealism versus pragmatism. Um, in the same way that it's okay to be wrong, um, if you're proven wrong for the right reason, right? Like if you're proven wrong with right information, that's okay. It's okay to not know. Like we can be experts and not have the answer to these questions at the same time. I think that any reasonable or responsible advocate is honest about the struggle of navigating these really difficult, abstruse concepts in their own lives, and also in a way that is that sets an example for others and models good behavior for others. We have to be vulnerable, and I think that I see this all the time on YouTube, and in general in discourse. People are just so sure of themselves, whether it's vegans or non-vegans. Nobody's really, and I think what happens is everyone's just so sure of themselves. Everyone's so busy being right that we all just end up talking past each other. And maybe I was talking past pescatarians, which is why I'm super happy to be in this video right now. Because it's a reality check. We all do it. Even me, like on my high horse here, talking about big think advocacy stuff. I was wrong a few months ago. That's perfectly okay. The point is to be constructive in your criticism, like Mike was for me, and um, to engage in the discussion, to realize where you went wrong and where you might go to be right. And I actually kind of want to pivot towards that. So, what can I do? What can we do to be a little bit more inclusive? Um, so, like in terms of pescatarians, I think I'm on your. I agree with you. Um, I think that we can make the case that we should call them allies. Um, there are other examples that I'm a little bit curious about too, in terms of should we consider people allies? So I don't know. Maybe was there something else that you wanted to say to the topic, or do you mind if we jump into this?
No, yeah, let's pivot. My
Yeah.
article does use other examples. Did you have some immediately at your fingertips in mind?
So one that popped up in my head was people who um, verbally at least support veganism and support animal rights, but are not vegan and are not pescatarian and not vegetarian and nothing, right? Like they're just typical people. There's got to be a word for that. They're
Omnivores?
carnists. They're carnists or
Well,
omnivores.
yeah. Well, carnism is the philosophy that underlies meat eating. So if they're spreading vegan philosophy, they're undermining carnism. They're underlying those ideas, but they're actually in reality omnivores is what I've always called
Well,
them.
I might argue that they're acting out carnism
I guess they are acting out carnism, yeah.
because they might have some abstract intellectual understanding of the issues, but in their own lives, they don't incorporate that knowledge into their actions.
Do you feel
So
like is there a real segment of people that do that spread like that are supportive but not they don't make
it,
any steps like they don't even call themselves a
I,
pescetarian? It's just
I
an
can't
abstract
speak to it.
example.
Well, I have had people say that to me. I mean, obviously, like I can't say on any statistical or like objective level whether
Yeah,
or how many individuals there are like that. But I mean, I see these things on Facebook. I've worked with a few individuals who've, said, "Oh man, that's really great that you're vegan. I wish I could, but X. Oh
yeah,
man, I really care too about the animals or the, stuff like that." I do get that, like anecdotally, and I see that on social media. I don't know how real it is, but I feel like it might be real because I feel like it reflects a tendency that I can understand in people. So it's just a hunch. But
yeah.
just like those individuals, when those things do happen, because I think we can all agree, maybe not about the numbers, but at least that it does happen, that there are these individuals out there who at least expressly support veganism, but not through their actions.
Yeah,
Now, individuals like that, like, mhm,
but don't you think they support veganism? You know, like they make a couple posts on Facebook. They're like supportive to their vegan friends, but they're not like really doing on the ground vegan advocacy. They're not arguing with people about it. Like if that existed, if you were like omnivore, like diet totally unchanged, but you actually did advocacy, if you were actually like writing about this stuff or arguing with people, not even arguing, but having conversations about the problems
mhm.
with factory farming and dairy, then I guess, yeah, you get my stamp of approval as an ally. But I just think that most of the people who are just dyed in the wool omnivores who maybe express some support for friends and express support for you on Facebook and stuff like that, they're not really doing much advocacy work. Um,
Well, maybe I'm super cynical, but I see a lot of that in other contexts, where people try to be, they get on their moral horse on social media, like clicktivism. Um, but I guess the point is, maybe let's just say, even if you want to put this in a hypothetical context, would someone like that, what what should my response be if someone says something like that to me? Oh man, I really support what you do. I love animals too. And maybe it just ends there. I love animals too,
yeah,
nothing else.
I would
What
just
do I say?
try to emphasize how accessible veganism is, that it's easier than you think, that humans are much more adaptable, your taste buds are more adaptable, that there's just a lot of benefits. You want to push them towards it, but I wouldn't call them really an ally by any stretch. Um, there probably are a lot of people like that, though, that support veganism in name, but are not really like, it doesn't mean anything practically for them. You think about
Or
how
at least
many,
they
like,
support the spirit of veganism.
yeah, you think about like how many subscribers Unnatural Vegan has on YouTube, or like a lot of these Instagram lifestyle vegans who are like spreading the message, one selfie at a time. Um, they have like millions of followers, some of them, and
Yeah.
they're not all vegans.
Well, here's the example that I think of too is, especially to that end, PETA. All the time they have videos of celebrities who talk about fur or animal adoption or, problems with certain types of meat production, stuff like that. But I'm sure most of these individuals who are going on these PETA videos are not actually vegans themselves. In fact, like I saw a video for George Lopez and he was talking about, I think it was dog adoptions. And I thought to myself, like, I wonder how must feel to be like one of the PETA production people. Like, oh man, George, you're doing really great work. Like having to like feign support in a way, because like PETA of all people, I'm sure in their heads they're thinking like, wow, man, you're just not going far enough.
Yeah,
But
Oh
like
man,
they're doing it. I mean, they get celebrities, so they have to be
they
doing
do.
something right about your balance, what you're talking about.
I remember hearing a story about an anti-fur event, and they were doing some kind of speaking tour with some celebrity. Um, I don't know, maybe it was one of the Baywatch girls or something, but she was wearing like really high, probably knee-high leather boots while opposing fur. And one of the journalists rightly pointed this out, and the PETA representative was like, "This is a fur event." Like, just not even addressing the contradiction, not even worried about it. Just like, we've got our celebrity name. Um, we'll take them however we can get them, even if they're wearing leather.
I guess that should be our approach in a way. Like those individuals. So they're allies. Or is that an
Yeah,
ally?
I guess so. Yeah,
Okay.
it's tough. It's a tough thing, but like
Well, we got to
any
address the borderlands, right?
yeah, anyone who's moving the needle forward, anyone who's changing minds, um, that's really the goal. And even if it is flawed people changing minds, you
Hmm.
know, we have to take what we can get because we're not big in numbers. I mean, we're small enough that we just need to take what we can get. I mean, not water down our message too much. Again, it's going back and forth. It's the balance.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so another example of someone who I might think would be an ally is an environmentalist who's not vegan.
Yeah.
So someone who's really concerned by the environment and the things going wrong with it. And maybe they even say, well, I know all these things about how animal agriculture relates to a number of different environmental problems. Um, but when I go out for lunch tomorrow, I'm probably going to get a burger, stuff like that. Like, are those people allies? How do we ally with those individuals? How would you do that?
Um, well, it depends. I mean, a, a lot of environmentalists don't really do any work related to diet, but you're proposing an environmentalist that does, say, publish studies that point out the environmental damage done by animal agriculture or something.
Well, I'm even just saying, like, you're like, excuse me, like your lay environmentalist, your lay person, for lack of a better phrase.
Yeah.
Just your average advocate, protester, whatever, who says, I care about the environment and I want to do what I can to reduce damage to the environment. Yeah, I think the answer is obvious, like how you approach those people, right? Like you tailor your argument towards the environmental damage caused by animal
Yeah,
agriculture.
exactly.
Sure, that's
Yeah.
fine. But So on a but that addresses the argumentation side of it. I think what we're talking about when we talk about allying with individuals is being able to keep them in our corner, and being able to say, "Hey, look, when I'm doing something for animal rights or for veganism, maybe I can call you. Hey, when you're doing something for the environment,
Yes.
maybe you can call me." Maybe when we're doing these kinds of YouTube videos, let's invite them on, see what their perspective is, stuff like that. Like, I think ally is a little bit more deep than advocacy. So when
Yeah.
I ask questions like how do we consider them an ally, or do we consider the social media supporter an ally? My next question naturally would be, how do we ally with them then? So let's just
Yes.
say we consider them allies.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense for the environmentalists to call vegans allies because, you know, environmentalists know that vegans are on their side. As far as like your example of the lay environmentalist that doesn't really have any particular education or knowledge about the relationship between animal agriculture and the environment, to that extent, they're not really a vegan ally if they're not making that connection. Hopefully, anyone that calls themselves a real environmentalist would make that connection, um, unless there's some type of carnist philosophy just getting in their way, and they're like, it just has to be this way. Um,
Now, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but that does make
yeah,
me think of something. Is that maybe a barrier towards allyship, is carnism? Because I think
it has to be.
your point
Yeah,
is interesting. Because there are individuals who are on board but not ready. Um, and do we consider them an ally? Do we consider someone who's for lack of a better term, like subsumed by carnism. Are they allies? Is anybody who's a carnist an ally? And I don't know.
Well, I
I
would
wouldn't
say,
say
yeah,
so, but I guess
carnism.
it depends.
I mean, carnism and carnists are not like monolithic labels. I mean, there are varying
Yeah, yeah.
degrees to which you can subscribe to that philosophy. But I mean, if you are someone who's saying like, hey, I acknowledge the deforestation and the amount of land use and the water use that's wasted, but look, we've got to feed millions of people a healthy diet, and the only way to do it is through meat. Like if they're convinced by that carnist lie that you just can't be healthy as a vegan, then I suppose that they're not an ally. Yeah, because
Hmm.
they've bought into carnist propaganda, and they're not going to be on our side. If we call them, they're going to be like, "What are you talking about?" Um,
Okay.
but I mean, to whatever extent that you can partner with an environmentalist in a specific way, talking about um, if they care about the health of water systems and the water table. You can talk about how slaughterhouses pollute waterways. Um,
Hmm.
nitrogen in the rivers,
Yeah. No.
whatever.
Yeah. No. Yeah. I see what you're saying. Bring it down to their level. And talk in their
Yeah,
language. That kind of thing. Absolutely. Um, and I think that's a good directive for how to navigate that kind of relationship. Um, so those are just some examples of that I thought of that are kind of crude, but kind of get to the grayer areas of this subject matter. Um, because
yeah,
I think what we're talking about is a representation of a very broad range of thought. So even veganism aside, I mean, there's so many different layers about non-veganism. Different ways in which people are omnivores, but you know, we have a friend who maybe not so much anymore, but at least a few years ago, he was avowedly like a meat eater. Um, you know, and I tried a little bit, but it's tough to make him an ally. Um, now would he be an ally? He's a little bit more amenable to this kind of thinking, but
yeah. I would say
um,
he's a lot more. I mean, he seems like solidly reducitarian.
yeah,
Last I
well,
spoke to him, I don't know.
eh, so now he's a little bit more I don't know what the word would be, but like so I guess not him in particular, but let's just say anyone in general who starts talking a little bit about, hey, how hey, there's some problems here. I'm not totally okay with this thing here. Right? Like, okay, sure. So we hone in, we start to argue again with that, or I should say, we start to speak with that individual about some of the points that they might be concerned by and relating it to veganism, right? We can do that. That's simple. How do we pivot that into like a broader relationship? How do we say to them, hey, you can trust me to call me when you have questions about these subjects, and I can trust you to call you when I need perspective about what it was once like, before the days where I was vegan. Um, that's the hard thing for me.
Yeah,
I try to ally with people all the time, and that's kind of the whole impetus for this. I try to ally with people all the time about veganism, and when I say that, I mean, I say, hey, look, here's my card. If you have any questions about veganism, like what concerns you most about animal agriculture? And then I hone in on that and I say, hey, look, we're doing this thing. If you have any things that you're doing, and I have a whole repertoire of individuals who I call allies, but I don't truly feel are allies. And I don't know if I'm doing what I can do. I'm doing what I should do. But what's the best way to do it? Like, how do I, and I should say, the people that I call allies who I've developed these relationships with, they've also dealt out their hand to me a little bit too. So I didn't have to try so hard to produce these relationships.
yeah, exactly.
Um,
I mean, the only reason you call them allies is because they have some sympathy with what you're saying, and they have something you can hone in on. And that's exactly what I would say to you: is to just what you said is the perfect thing, which is really like what concerns you most about meat and dairy consumption, animal agriculture industry. If it's the health, you could go one way. If it's just how you feel, you could go another. If it's the environment, if it's uh, politics, whatever it is, you can hone in on that and you can have 10 different conversations depending on where they want to take it. And hopefully it is a continuing relationship and it's just they're more or less a person you're taking under your wing and you're trying to be like their vegan mentor. Um, they're whether or not they're allies is sort of dependent on what they take away from what you're saying and how they choose to educate themselves and pass along this information to others. And obviously, there's nothing clear cut about like ally here and non ally there. It's sort of like a gradient. And to whatever extent you are fighting animal agriculture, whether that be through um, policy or interpersonal means or um, doing environmental work, whatever it is, you are an ally to whatever extent that you do that. But it's a gradient, you know?
Yeah. And that's the frame. I think that that's the right frame. I think that the answer to the question, are pescatarians are vegan allies? The answer is yeah. In some
Yeah.
circumstances, in many circumstances, yeah. More broadly, can anyone be an ally? Sure. I mean, like you're saying, I mean, there's a gradient. There's a set of criteria that are involved in allyship, like making that determination if someone is an ally. But I think what we lose sight of in this conversation is the gradient that you're referring to.
Yeah.
You know, I think that what I was thinking of earlier in our discussion was, so I imagined, and I'm not saying that veganism is 100% with this analogy, but it's just in terms of like putting it into a frame. So veganism, let's just say, is 100. Now, to an individual who's maybe 50% of the way there, I would consider them an ally.
Yeah.
Maybe an individual who's 25%, not so much. 13, 10%, you're not an ally.
But what are these things? Are
You're
these
saying,
measures of dietary, of how much of your diet has switched towards veganism? Is it how much you're talking about vegan issues? This is what's so hard about it because it's multivariate. You could
oh,
be
it's
a
all the
very
above.
loud 10% or like a very quiet 50%, you know? So you're putting all of it into one scale, in terms of how much you eat meat and dairy, how much you talk about it with others, whether you sign into environmental petitions about this, all together, one scale.
Yeah, I mean, everything's in the mix, but the things that aren't relevant, I'll take out of the mix. You know,
Yeah.
so I'm not gonna. I don't. No one's gonna lose points because they're a quiet 50. You know, they're still a 50. Um, to continue with that analogy. But the point really is,
But wait, I
I
don't get
imagined.
it. Because
So what I
volume
was.
volume determines how much you're an ally, right? Doesn't it? If you are going to protests every week um, and eating
Well,
meat, you might be just as effective as someone who is, 80% reducitarianism but doesn't talk to anyone about it, right? Do you see
yeah.
what I'm saying?
Well, I'm saying that it's a both and kind of
Yeah.
situation. So like, I'm not going to use the same criteria to evaluate every single individual who might be an ally.
Yeah.
Different individuals or different groups might have different characteristics and qualities that make them more part of an alliance than someone else. So what I was really trying to say just now, I guess maybe I didn't put it entirely clearly, was that the lens through which I look at these issues is circumstantial, but there is a checklist. And it's not like I'm going through the whole checklist every time, but I'm looking at the relevant criteria and making sure that those boxes are checked at least when I'm looking at someone. So for example, the friend that I was referring to earlier, who's seems to be making more steps towards this kind of thinking and lifestyle. Maybe he gets more check marks than he did a year ago, but they're different than the check marks I would look at with a friend of mine from class who consistently, I've had multiple classes with him, and who consistently tells me about how he cares about veganism, and he gets a little defensive when I talk to him about veganism. Um, but he consistently brings up his support for veganism and stuff like that. I don't care. He gets a different set of check marks,
Yeah.
but he's not as much of an ally as the friend that I'm referring to. But the point really is that there's a lot of things happening in the mix when I personally look at these decisions and make these determinations about who's an ally. But I guess I was just concerned because at how systematized we want to make this when we make these assessments for like allyship and stuff like that.
Yeah, I
I
think
think we both agree not so much.
yeah, I think we both have an instinct towards systematizing and finding the borderlines when it's really not so important. That's why I use the term gradient, because it's just like, yeah, there's a sliding scale and you could be somewhere along it, and towards the end you'll definitely be, allyship is towards the end, and then there's like more of a gray area in the middle. Um, and it doesn't really matter so much. I mean, we just want to push people towards the right to be either vegans themselves or allies. Um, Part of the problem is that it's very much up to the individual. You might be a pescatarian that says, look, this is just the way I eat. I don't really give a shit if anyone else eats the way I eat, but I feel good like this. That person might be an ally in that they model a way of life that is without meat, that makes them feel good and happy. But they might say, like, I don't want to be part of your weird vegan campaign. They might feel totally separate from us. So, it's up to the individual if they're persuaded by these arguments, and if they feel like, mostly it's about ethics, really. You only feel an impulse to get other people to eat like you if you feel an ethical um, attachment to it, right? If you just feel like it's the right thing to do. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that kind of wraps it up. I mean, in a way, because I think that we've duked it out. I think that we maybe have developed a better understanding. And I think what you just suggested too is that it's up to the individual about making these determinations and stuff like that. So I'll pivot one more direction towards the
Mm-hmm.
audience just to say, hey, guys and gals, think about what we've been talking about. If you're a vegan, ask yourself how open you've been to forming alliances with non-vegans. Think about what goes into your thought process when you're asking these questions and making these decisions. Um, we want to, or maybe you don't as an individual, but we at The Reason Vegan want to be inclusive. We want to make sure that we are framing the issue in a way that can be understood by all and accepted by all, not just vegans. So we have to ask ourselves a different question that you as an audience member might ask yourself about alliance and allyship. But ask yourself these questions, because as a vegan, more generally too, but as a vegan in particular, you are not an island. Um, you know, Whether you maybe want to realize it or not, or maybe if you're not okay with it, but as a vegan, you're representing something that's bigger than you. And not being able to duke it out or figure these things out, navigate these discussions, be proven wrong, be open to allies, be a little uncomfortable with your allies. Sure, I'm not some of the people that I would call an ally, I disagree with, but I'm happy to have them around, and I think that their presence in my work improves my work and enhances the work overall. And I'm uncomfortable sometimes calling them allies, but I do it. We need to do that too. We try to do that at The Reason Vegan. Obviously, it's always a work in progress. And I just hope that maybe this was something for you all to take away in that regard.
Yeah, in a way, it's a gift that veganism gives you, the ability to be part of a movement, the ability to want to change minds. And even if you're not vegan yourself, um, I think it's so incumbent upon us to want to move the needle and to change minds, that you too can be an ally, and you could be part of something bigger than yourself to make a difference ethically, environmentally, politically. whatever your angle is. Um, Thanks everybody for watching. I do appreciate that you pivoted there. I kind of forgot that we were doing this on YouTube Live, and this is our maiden voyage. So sorry if we're too rambly, too long, quality issues. But
Well, I just want to ramble one more time just
yeah,
to say,
go ahead.
in our description, check out our description. We have a link for my original post where I talked about pescatarianism. We have a link for Mike's post on our website. Check out our website. We're doing a lot more things. Just this kind of discussion. We're trying to engage with Chipotle about some of their marketing. We're moving along towards doing campus engagement kinds of things. We're really trying to grow as an organization. We're going to be making some very major moves in the next few weeks and things like that. So definitely just follow us. Follow us on our website or on our social media, that whole thing, and put your comments below. I know I end every video saying that, but I want this to be more than just a conversation between myself and Mike or myself and the audience generally. Sometimes I want people to talk back at me. And just as Mike talked back at me to say, hey, maybe your thinking is not, or maybe I should more properly, what I'll say is Mike would talk back to me and say, hey, I think instead of framing it the way that you did in this video, we should think about the issue like this. I love that kind of stuff. I love feedback and constructive criticism and realizing that the way I was thinking is not the most appropriate or optimal way all the time. So prove me wrong too, guys. Definitely go in the comments. Tell me what you think about our discussion, your perspective. You agree with Mike, you agree with me, whatever. Let us know.
Yeah, no doubt. We want to spend as little time being wrong as possible. So definitely, we love audience engagement. And
Yeah. I mean, and I have more confidence than I let on. I'm just a naturally self-deprecating individual, but I'm not. I don't think I'm stupid, guys. I'm just okay. I'm vulnerable. Okay, I'm okay with being wrong.
you're good, Scout. All right.
But yeah. Yeah. So
Let's
yeah, like Mike said.
adios.
Yeah.
Sign off.